This is the Big Stories Podcast, where we tell the amazing and inspiring stories from across the Big 12 Conference.
I'm your host, Cleon Wall. The Big 12 regular season is wrapped up, and we are gearing up for the postseason. Coming up a bit later, we will talk about Baylor's disappointing regular season with Ashley Hodge of Sic'Em 365. But before we get to the big storylines that I recorded earlier in the day, the conference announced the men's basketball awards and conference teams. I think most of the awards seem spot on. Arizona's Tommy Lloyd wins Coach of the Year. BYU's A.J. DeBonsa wins Freshman of the Year. But I wouldn't have been surprised if someone else would have won that. There are so many good freshmen in this conference. Texas Tech's Christian Anderson was named Most Improved Player of the Year, even though I thought he was possibly in line to win Conference Player of the Year. And that's the award that is most confusing to me. Arizona's Jaden Bradley is the winner. The senior from Rochester, New York, averaged 13 points and 5 assists on the season. He was the leader of the number one team in the conference. And I guess that's why he won the award. I'm not saying he's not good, I'm just surprised he won it. I thought it would go to a guy like an A.J. DeBonsa, who is leading the nation in scoring, or Christian Anderson, who is one of the top assist guy in the nation, and he's a really good shooter, and has been leading his team after J.T. Toppin was lost for the season. I wouldn't have been surprised if Justin Jefferson would have won it. He doesn't lead his team in scoring, but he's number 2 for the Iowa State Cyclones and does a lot to help his team. He's also a senior. Only 3 players were unanimous selections to the first team, and Bradley wasn't one of them. Well, maybe there were too many point guards he was going against, like Anderson and Houston's Kingston Flemings. Both of those guys were unanimous first-team selections alongside DeBonsa. Again, I'm just stunned. Good for Bradley and good for the Wildcats. Speaking of the Wildcats, let's now get to the storylines, which were recorded earlier in the day.
The Big Stories' 5 biggest storylines. Number 1.
Do you remember that time when the Arizona Wildcats lost 2 games in a row by 4 and 3 points, so 7 points combined? And that second loss was to Texas Tech at home. Was there any panic? Well, no, at least not here on Big Stories. We knew they'd bounce back, and bounce back they did. They finished off the season with 6 straight wins, including victories over Houston, Iowa State, and a revenge victory over Kansas, if you believe in revenge victories. They are the top seed in the Big 12 tourney and will be one of the favorites in the conference to go to the Final Four.
Number 2.
The number 2 seed are the Houston Cougars. They lost 3 in a row to ranked teams, but righted the ship at the end of the season, winning 3 in a row. I would think the Cougars will be just fine going into both tournaments. In those last 3 games, their points allowed measured closer to the average for the season, which is around 63. Kelvin Sampson always has good defensive squads, and I expect them to lean into that for the postseason.
Number 3.
The Big Stories crew has no idea how to predict what the Iowa State Cyclones will do in the postseason. This team has had some of the highest highs and lowest lows we've seen in the conference. They have beaten Houston and Kansas in convincing victories this season, but they've also been run off the court in uncharacteristic losses to TCU, BYU, and Cincinnati. In those big wins, this team looks poised and ready to make a legitimate run in March, but at the same time, has looked like a first-round exit in their losses. Just think, if they had won one of those games that we talked about, they would have had a double bye in the conference tournament.
Number 4.
Let's talk about a couple of mystery teams, and we mentioned them last week when we talked about teams with injured stars, and that's Texas Tech and BYU. Tech lost their last 2 regular season games, but still got the double bye in the Big 12 tourney. In their last regular season loss to BYU, they made 16 of 27 field goals from behind the 3-point line. They shoot a lot of threes and make a lot of threes. When they're on, they're hard to beat. When it comes to rebounding, they've held their own since top rebounder J.T. Toppin went down with an ACL injury. They've only been out-rebounded once since they lost him. That being said, they gave up 20 offensive rebounds to the Cougars last week, and not everyone likes crashing the offensive glass, but that's something to keep an eye on this postseason. As for BYU, who knows which team will show up in the postseason? Is it going to be the team that beat 2 ranked teams in Iowa State and Texas Tech, or the team that lost to UCF, West Virginia, and Cincinnati in back-to-back-to-back games? And 2 of those losses were not even close. We shall see if potential number 1 overall draft pick A.J. DeBonsa, Robert Wright, and the rest of the gang can get things together for the postseason.
Number 5.
And finally, we want to give final props to to the fabulous freshmen in the Big 12. Many of them are leading their teams in scoring or giving them big-time minutes or hitting big shots or making defensive plays. I can't mention all of them, and we've talked about a lot of them on Big Stories, but I will mention the guys who could get drafted in the NBA. BYU's DeBonsa and Kansas's Darren Peterson are vying for the number 1 pick in the draft. Houston's Kingston Flemings will probably end up in the top 10. By the way, this after he was ranked number 22 in this freshman class. Arizona's Braden Burries and Koa Pete could be picked in the top 20, and Baylor's Tounde Yessoufou and Cameron Carr will likely get taken in the first round. That is, if all of them decide to stay in. And if that's the case, that's pretty impressive. Last thing on the first two guys I mentioned, both Darren Peterson and AJ DeBonsa have both hinted that they may forego the upcoming NBA draft and return to their school for another year. Hey, I know NIL has led some guys to returning schools to play, but I'm not buying it with either of these guys. These guys know how to promote their brand and facilitate engagement on social media. They just want people to keep talking about them. Both Peterson and DeBonsa will be capable of contributing right away at the next level. It's story time, and we continue to review each team in the conference as the season concludes. Last week, we discussed the bottom 2 Big 12 squads in Kansas State and Utah. Another program that has struggled this season is Baylor. It's a Bears squad that received some top 25 votes in the non-conference season, and then conference happened and they finished 16-15 for the entire season. So I asked Ashley Hodge of Sic'Em 365 what happened to a Scott Drew team who has 2 very dynamic guards.
Well, I think we can tie it a lot to point guard play. Obviously, the point guard that BYU has left Baylor in a bad situation because he left so late in the transfer process. They didn't get an adequate replacement. They've had some, Isaac Williams has been a surprise to the positive, but he's not ready to lead, Baylor to a championship hunt for sure. And defense has been a major issue. They've struggled with injuries in the front court. I think the depth has really hurt them on the defensive side of the ball. They do have 2 really dynamic wings in Cam Carr and Tounde Yessoufou, as you mentioned, but just not enough. It's just some of the same problems that BYU has. They're really good on offense, not as good as BYU, but they're terrible on defense. And I know BYU fans can relate to that.
Speaking of Carr and Yessoufou, they've had really good seasons when you look at them statistically. Are they like, if you look back on the season, are they like the bright spots of this season? Like, man, or is it more of a, in some ways, man, what could have been, because they have been such bright spots for this team this season?
Both. I think Tounde Yessoufou is as good as Baylor fans expected him to be. He was a 5-star recruit, expected to be a one and done guy. So, he's delivered. Baylor's had some success with one and done types in recent years, Keontae George and obviously VJ Edgecombe just recently. But, I think that Cam Carr's been a major surprise. People that watched him practice early in the summer knew this is an NBA talent for sure. But he averaged 4 or 5 points at Tennessee and couldn't see the court. And then he comes to Baylor and he's playing at an all Big 12 level. They both have their flaws. They don't finish games well, particularly Carr. I think his strength is a major issue, and he can get bullied. He went 28 minutes. They were up against Houston for a lot of the game. He went the last 28 minutes without taking a shot, just disappeared offensively. So there's issues like that. But you also wonder how good they would be with a big time point guard. Obviously, if Rob Wright was their point guard, I think they would be much better. If they had someone like Rob Wright as their point guard, I think that they could be a lot more effective. They just miss that guy that can really control the game with his pace and be able to get good wing shots.
Both Carr and Yessoufou are, well, in certain mock drafts out there, they're expected or likely to be first-round draft picks, middle to lower first-round draft picks. Do either of those guys come back for next season, maybe improve their draft stock? And, as we've heard from draft experts, they say next year's draft is not as strong as this year's draft. Either of those guys think about coming back and playing for Baylor one more year?
Yeah, I think it's a possibility, or they may play for somebody else. You never know. But I think that Baylor's going to have a lot more money to spend this next season. And I think if I was a betting man, I think Baylor will get one of those guys back. I think Carr is probably more likely because his body isn't NBA ready. Tounde, his body's NBA ready, and you can improve in the NBA just as easily as you can improve in college. Now, there's no question you can make an argument that, his draft stock will be better next year than this year. But there's some risk. There's some downside risk to that as well. So, yeah, I think Carr is more likely, but I think one of those two guys will be back for Baylor.
Hey, before we talk about how you think Baylor could possibly do in the Big 12 tournament, I do want to ask you about next season. You've mentioned point guard, and that sounds like it's a need for next season, for the 2026-2027 season. What else does Scott Drew need to do to make sure that the Bears are contending for Big 12 titles again?
Yeah, I mean, they've missed on a lot of guys this year. They had almost $5 million tied up in Michael Ratai, Obi Agbem. Obi's been fine. And James Nagy, the NBA 31st pick in the NBA draft. He hadn't been as advertised. He hasn't helped them much. So they've got some money to spend, taking the slots that those guys are going to leave. I think they really need a power forward, preferably someone who's very versatile. Josh Jefferson at Iowa State would be a great prototype, but everybody's looking for that. They would need a scoring guard, and certainly someone to replace either Tounde or Cam if they lose one of those guys. But point guard is going to be a major priority. They love Isaac Williams. They're going to want to try to keep Isaac Williams and perhaps start him alongside an experienced point guard. But, Scott Drew's had a long history of great point guard play. And this year was one of those years that he didn't have that. But certainly I think Baylor will return to a dynamic, upper 5, 6, or 7 top point guard in the conference. They'll spend money on that.
The chances that Baylor makes a big-time run to the Big 12 tournament, at least to the championship game, are probably pretty slim. But I could probably say that about 12 or 13 of the teams in the Big 12 right now.
Right.
But what do you want to see from this team as we close out this season?
Yeah, obviously, Baylor fans want to see them rattle off a couple wins in the Big 12 tournament. I think the double bye format would allow that to happen. You're not going to be playing one of the better teams until the quarterfinals. But like you said, the chances of Baylor winning 5 games in the Big 12 tournament is very slim. So I think the crown is going to be their goal, to play in the crown and to do well in that tournament. They are playing a lot better basketball down the stretch. They led the game against Houston with 8 minutes to play. They played Arizona very tough at home. Really should have won that game, and Arizona pulled out at the end. They went on the road, beat UCF, pretty good UCF team. So they're playing better basketball. So I think hopefully they can continue that uptrend.
A big thanks to Ashley Hodge for joining us for this episode, and to Garrett Glauser for producing it. Coming up on Thursday's episode, you'll hear how the University of Utah's Trails program is helping people with serious spinal injuries get back into sports and recreation. I'm Cleon Wall, and Big Stories is a production of BYU Radio.